History isn't always this neat, clean story. A lot of the time, it's just a collection of fragmented, sometimes really painful voices. And today, we're going to open up just one of those voices, a pretty stark report from 1948 called Behind the Iron Curtain in Kashmir. Now, we're not here to say this is exactly what happened. Instead, we're going to look really closely at the picture this one powerful document was trying to paint for the world right in a moment of intense crisis.
Okay, so here's our game plan for digging into this. First, we'll get a handle on what this report actually is. Then, we'll dive straight into its most shocking claims, the allegations of mass violence, and hear the personal, eyewitness accounts it uses as proof. After that, we'll look at the picture it paints of a whole region just thrown into chaos. And finally, we'll wrap up by asking the big question, what does a document like this really mean today?
So first things first, it's really important to understand what we're looking at. This is not a history book written decades later. It's a primary source. It's a piece of political communication straight from 1948. And it was absolutely designed to be persuasive, using not just text, but some really haunting photographs to make its case to the world. Our goal here is to explore the evidence and the arguments exactly as this document presented them way back then. And this report, well, it doesn't waste any time. It gets right to it, confronting the reader immediately with its most shocking accusation, a claim that really frames every single story and criticism that follows. This is the headline they used. 2 words. That's it. Stark. Brutal. The authors chose this phrase to grab you, to frame their entire argument around the sheer scale of the violence they're about to describe. And then they attach this staggering number to that headline. The report claims that 387,000 Muslims were, in its words, systematically exterminated. And to give that huge number some kind of context, the document immediately zooms in on a very specific time and a very specific place. According to the text, this all went down in Jammu province in October of 1947. The document alleges that forces of the Dogra state, led by the Maharaja, were responsible. And here's a crucial detail. It claims all of this took place 5 days before the tribal invasion from Pakistan. That's a key part of their argument, because it tries to completely reframe the sequence of events that we often hear about. The report then breaks down that massive number into a timeline of specific horrific incidents. It alleges mass killings at Akhnor Bridge, the slaughter of men in Sumfor village, and a deadly ambush on a convoy of Muslim refugees just outside Jammu city. Now, critically, the document says these accounts were put together by a joint Indo-Pakistani team, which was led by 2 Englishmen. And that leads to this direct quote from that joint report, which alleges official complicity. It says, "The Kashmir state troops looked on indifferently." So the accusation here isn't just that violence was happening, but that state forces either just stood by and let it happen, or were actively collaborating. And that's a central theme you see again and again in this document. Huge numbers can be hard to wrap your head around. So to make it all feel real, the document shifts gears. It moves from those big statistics to these really personal stories. It tries to put a human face on the tragedy with firsthand accounts of survival. These are the stories that go along with the report's very somber photographs, these stark images of displaced families and huge refugee camps.
One of the most vivid accounts comes from an unnamed man who describes this just harrowing ordeal. He says he was captured, forced to dig a trench, and then was beaten and slashed with kukris before being literally left for dead. But the document adds this really chilling detail. The man personally showed the investigator his 7 kukri scars as proof of his story.
But the report doesn't just stick to one type of story. It then presents a totally different dimension of the tragedy, this time from the perspective of a neutral observer. It includes testimony from a British Red Cross officer who saw a completely different kind of incident unfold. This officer, Colonel H.K. Johnson, was there observing the evacuation of non-Muslim refugees. He reports seeing an Indian aircraft, and then finding out that a house full of these very evacuees had taken a direct hit. You can just feel his shock in the quote. These people were bombed right on the verge of being moved to safety. And this quote from the colonel really captures the raw human impact of it all. He talks about the 130-mile journey to Rawalpindi with the wounded, who were all women and children. It's such a powerful, non-political statement. It's just about the suffering, and it tries to convey the sheer horror of the situation on the ground for absolutely everyone involved. Okay, so beyond these accounts of violence, the report then zooms out to paint this grim picture of the aftermath. It gets into what it calls a total collapse of daily life and governance under the new administration, arguing the whole region had just descended into chaos and fear. To make this point, the document relies on the testimony of two English women to draw this really stark contrast. They describe Kashmir, which was once this thriving, world-famous tourist destination, as a place now just defined by, quote, complete administrative chaos and widespread misery. The whole economy was just shattered. And these women list some pretty specific examples of what they called misrule. One of them had her radio confiscated just for listening to a station from Lahore. They talk about private property, even historic gardens being seized by the new government. But maybe most telling, they describe a visit by Jawaharlal Nehru. They say he sped through Srinagar in a closed car with a heavy-armed escort, which was a world away from his past triumphal visits in open carriages. So let's just pull back for a second. We've walked through the key arguments of this 1948 report. It's a document that was clearly designed to shock and to persuade. It builds its story using statistics, eyewitness accounts, and those really haunting photographs of displaced people. And it's a powerful reminder that this is just one piece of a vast, painful, and deeply complex puzzle. Ultimately, when you look at a source like this, with its stark headlines, its harrowing stories, its images of suffering, it forces you to confront what history is actually made of. It's not neat. It's not clean. It's one voice crying out from a moment of absolute crisis. And the question that leaves us with is this: what is our responsibility when we unearth these voices? How do we listen? And where do we place them within the larger and often contradictory story of the past?